Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great Thursday wherever you are in the world. My name is Sarah Thurklow, and I'm a member of the Platform Solutions team. Today, I'm joined with a couple of my teammates. We are going to be doing a presentation about the common workflow tasks for the awarded status. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. The session is being recorded and a copy will be sent to you within a week. It just takes a little bit of time to get it uploaded to YouTube. As well, we'd love to hear your questions and love to hear your feedback. We won't be answering questions until the end, but please feel free to post them throughout and we'll do our best to answer all of them. And now I will pass it over to Morgan, our presenter for today.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Morgan. I'm part of the Platform Solutions team. I'm just going to share my screen. So today I'm going to be talking about common workflow tasks associated with the awarded/approved status. The webinar we hosted on Tuesday actually focused on creating email reminders. Workflow I'm going to be showing today would be the workflow you'd actually create beforehand that would generate the initial report activities for those reminders. So an example of an awarded/approved status workflow could be when an application is moved to the approved status. I want to generate a handful of payment activities, send an email to the applicant, create a few progress reports, a final report, and a contract. I also want to update the record so that the approved date field reflects the current date. Some of my applications may have already been in the approved status, but were sent back for review or updates. In this case, I want to make sure that those applications do not go through the full workflow process again. I just want to update the approved date for those records. So I'll be showing an existing workflow in our system that basically represents the scenario I just described. I'll start off by explaining the basic setup for the workflow and then moving on to tasks. So just to start off, I need to set my workflow type. The type basically defines where your workflow is going to take place within the system. So in this case, my workflow is going to take place within my application manager. If it was taking place in the budget manager or program manager, I would select one of those UTAs. I then have my name. We suggest setting a consistent naming convention across all of your workflows. I prefer using the UTA name, the level of the record, so in this case, L1, and then the status that's going to trigger my workflow. Same goes for categories. We suggest using maybe the UTA as well as the record level, and then grouping them within those categories. Then we leave a description. In most cases, you just list out all of the tasks that are part of your workflow. It just makes it a lot easier to identify a certain workflow that you're looking for when scrolling through your workflow list. And then finally, we set the trigger on status. So this is basically what defines what's going to kickstart your workflow. So in this case, I want the approved status to trigger my workflow. If I want to build this in my live system first and then test it in my backup, I would make sure to leave the trigger on as deactivate in my live system just to make sure that it doesn't run. And then once it appears on my backup the next day, I can set it to the approved in the backup and test it out. And once I know it works, I can then go to my live system and set the trigger on as approved. But just leave it and deactivated in your live system until you're sure that it works the way you want it to. Okay, so there are a handful of tasks that you'll likely use when creating this kind of workflow. The ones that I'm going to be talking about today are acknowledgements. So these are tasks that allow you to send emails. I'm going to be talking about create new activity tasks, which allow you to generate a new activity / level 2 record associated with your level 1 record. And then finally, I'll be using a update custom field value task, which allows you to update the value of a specific custom field in your record. So the bulk of your workflow is going to be built within your tasks tab here. We always suggest building all of your tasks first and then connecting them at the end. So the first task in the workflow, we suggest calling it placeholder. This task actually doesn't have any function. It just exists to basically let you know that a new workflow has started when looking at a workflow history log. So if I click into this task, I'll see that the task type is acknowledgement. I did mention earlier that acknowledgements are used to send emails out. They can also be used just as like a blank task where nothing happens. So in this case, a placeholder task. And then I have my next task, which is create payment record. The task type used here is create new activity. So if I click in here, I've given it a name that clearly explains what this specific task is going to do. Then I've chosen my task type as create new activity. This allows me to choose the activity type I want to create, as well as the status I want to generate that activity in. In some cases, you'll want to use the scheduling feature, which will allow you to create multiple activities at once. So in this case, with my payment record, I want to create several. So I'll go to the scheduling tab and I can choose a start date and an end date. This will determine the start and the end of the activity scheduling period. Then I can set the frequency the activity is scheduled. So the activities will all be actually created at once, but the created date for the activity will take the scheduling frequency into account. Then I can select the total amount. This value will be dispersed evenly amongst all of my payment activities. And then finally, I can select the date and amount fields where this information is going to be stored in my level 2 record. So here I'll be storing my date information in the payment scheduled payment date field. I'll be storing my amount information in the payment amount field. So then my next task is going to be an acknowledgement. I want to send an approved receipt to the applicant. In this case, I'm going to be using the acknowledgement task for sending an email. So here again, I've created a name that specifies what the specific task is doing. I've chosen the acknowledgement task type. I've also set the role as owner here. So that means that the owner of the record is going to receive the email. So in this case, that's going to be the applicant. And then here we've actually configured it so that an email is going to go out. So in this dropdown, I've chosen email. I can set a subject. I can customize the body of the email. I'm also able to attach files. So I can do this by referencing a specific filed upload field, and I can attach the document associated with that field to this email. And the way that I would do that is by going @ hashtag, typing the field ID number, hashtag add. So then the document associated with that field is going to be attached to your email. Okay, our next 3 task types are the same as our create payment record. They're going to generate new activities, but they're all configured slightly differently. So I'll just click into the create progress report here. So here I have my name explaining what my task is doing, the task type, create new activity. I've specified again the activity type I want to generate, as well as the status. In this case, I've set some scheduling parameters as well, and I've set where I want to store the due date. I then also have a task to create my final report. In this case, I only want to create one single final report activity. I don't want to create multiple activities. So I can actually choose to disable my scheduling option so that when the workflow hits this specific task, it's only going to create one final report. And the same goes for creating my contract. I only want to generate a single contract. So I've chosen to disable the scheduling feature for this task as well. My very last task is to update date approved. So I'm going to be updating a specific custom field within my record. I've chosen the task type update custom field value. I've been able to choose a specific custom field from my record. You can search any of the custom fields here, but I've selected date approved. And I'm going to be updating it to the current date. So this will be the date that the workflow runs. So once I've built all of my tasks, I'll need to actually connect them using connectors. Connectors basically define how my workflow is going to operate. So you can create a new connector by clicking the new button here. We'll always start off with creating a starting connector, which links the start of the workflow to our very first task. So here we have a default name. In most cases, you can just leave the name as is. It will work fine. And then you can leave trigger type as default. But the one thing you want to pay attention to is the connect to option. So this is setting where the workflow is going to go next. So I want my workflow to go to the placeholder task. If I wanted to delay the start of my workflow by a few days, I could do so here. I could also specify if I want it to only take place on business days. As mentioned at the start, we only want records that have a blank approved date to go through the task. Applications that have already been approved have gone through this workflow before. So any record that already has an approved date should skip directly to my last task, which is to update the date approved. So the way I configure my workflow to accommodate this condition is by creating some branching conditions. So this is going to allow me to direct records to different tasks depending on a specific condition. So you can see here that I have two connectors, one labeled date approved not blank, one labeled date approved blank. So if I click into my first one here, I've given it a custom name to explain which records this connector is going to apply to. I've also set it so that it's going to connect to the very last task. So any of the records that already have a date approved value are going to just be sent directly to my update date approved task. I've also set some routing conditions. So in this case, it's going to be a custom condition. It's going to check if the date approved field is not blank. If that's the case, it's going to be funneled through this connector. I also need to make a connector to funnel any of the records that have a blank approved date so that they go to the correct task. So if I click into this one, I've again set the name to make it clear who it applies to. And I've also connected it to the next task on my list. I've also set a specific routing condition that specifies that if the date approved field is actually blank, it's going to be funneled through this specific connector. So once I've done this, I need to create connectors for the rest of my tasks. So just the one thing to pay attention to while doing this is making sure that you're choosing the correct connect to task in each of the connectors. So in this case, I want this one to connect to my send approved receipt. Once I've done this for all of my tasks, I just need to make sure that I've connected my final task to my complete status. We do this to let our system know that the workflow has been completed. So if I click in here, I can see that I've chosen to connect to complete. So once I've built my workflow and I want to make sure that it functions correctly, I can actually just navigate to an existing record. So I'll just select in here, and then I can flip the status on this record to approved. Click save. And now if I navigate up to my logs here, choose workflow history, I can see that my workflow tasks have happened and the status is complete. In this case, only 2 of the tasks have taken place because this record has been in the approved status before. So my workflow has recognized that it already has an approved date. So it's just pushed it to the final task, which is update date approved. I can also see the history of all of my workflow tasks as well by clicking on the history tab here and just seeing when the workflows run and where it's taking place. Okay, so that's it for me today. I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to start the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Morgan. That was awesome. So it looks like we have a couple questions. Does this only apply to report types, or can this be done with any kind of activity like a site visit?
You can generate any type of activity when you're using the create new activity task in your workflow.
That looks like all the questions we currently have, but if anybody thinks of a question afterward, you can definitely reach out to us at platformsolutions@smartsimple.com. Like I said earlier, we're always happy to hear from you and get some feedback. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks, Morgan, for the great presentation. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.